They all laughed because she was disabled until a poor farmer did this one thing for her. Have you ever stopped to think about what happened to people who were born different in the isolated rural areas of America? In older times, when cruelty often outweighed compassion? Imagine a beautiful young woman, just 20 years old, carrying a mark on her body that made her the focus of ridicule throughout her entire small town. This was in the 1950s, in a dusty little town nestled in the heart of rural Tennessee. The church bell set the rhythm for all the families. Dirt roads kicked up clouds of dust with every pickup truck that passed, and neighbors gathered on their front porches to dissect each other's lives. This was the backdrop for Eleanor's life, a young woman with fair skin and a delicate face, but whose leg made her walk with a noticeable limp. Everyone knew her, everyone judged her, and worst of all, everyone laughed. Every time she made her way to Sunday service, the whispers spread, "There goes the cripple." It was as if the entire town had conspired to turn her life into a spectacle of humiliation. But what no one expected was that a simple man, a poor farmer with strong hands and an even stronger heart, would change her destiny forever. His name was Avery. At 30, he was hardened by backbreaking work and carried the weight of loneliness. He had no idea that a simple, seemingly insignificant gesture would turn the whole town against him, but also lead him into the greatest and most heartbreaking love story of his life. And the most shocking thing is what happened in the end, something that left everyone stunned and that you won't believe when you find out. If you love stories that reveal the true nature of that era, tales of pain, prejudice, and true love, then stay with us until the end of this video, because only then will you understand what truly happened to Eleanor and Avery in that Tennessee town in the 1950s. Life seemed to move slowly, but the town's gossip always moved faster than any racehorse. The homes were simple wooden shacks, some painted white, others already weathered by time. The smell of frying bacon and coffee mixed with the smoke from wood stoves, and the ringing of the church bell echoed through the small town, dictating the routine as if it were law. The roads were beaten red dirt that clung to leather shoes and the hems of skirts. Nights were lit only by oil lamps or the moon, and young people gathered in the town square to talk, laugh, and often mock anyone who was different. And Eleanor was the most talked about, not because she sought attention, but because she carried what others called a defect. Her shorter leg caused her to limp, dragging her foot a little. This simple detail was enough for eyes to follow her like arrows. On her walk to church, with every step came a fresh, hidden snicker. Once, as she struggled across the street, she heard two girls whispering behind her. "Look at her, poor thing. She'll never get a husband." "Who would want a cripple?" the other replied, giggling. Eleanor squeezed her eyes shut, holding back tears, and walked on, as she always did. But inside, every word was a heavy stone crushing her heart. At night, she sat by her window, looking at the stars. She would ask herself, "Why, God, why was I born like this? Will I ever be loved?" And all the while, the town continued its cycle of silent malice. To the neighbors, she was just fodder for gossip. To Eleanor, every laugh was a fresh wound. The environment of that era was harsh, and there was no room for fragility. Difference was treated as an error. And she, so young and so beautiful, felt her life was condemned to loneliness. But little did Eleanor know that fate was preparing an encounter that would change everything. I need you to imagine her daily routine with me. Eleanor woke before the sun, when the light was still just a thread beneath her door. She sat on the edge of the bed, rubbed her right leg, took a deep breath, and began her daily ritual, putting on a thick sock, adjusting her sturdiest shoe, and slowly shifting her weight to stand. Every step was calculated. There were no audible complaints, just a silence that weighed heavier than any pain. In the kitchen, the simple sound of coffee brewing filled the house. Mrs. Yvonne, her mother, looked at her daughter with a tenderness that expertly hid her worry. "Honey, stay home today. The weather's turning cold," she'd say, stirring sugar into a mug. "Mom, if I stay, my mind will get worse. Let me take this embroidery to Mrs. Davis at the general store." Eleanor would answer with a smile meant to protect her mother. Along the way, the town seemed normal. Chickens in the yard, a distant radio playing an old country tune, old Mr. Harlan's wagon dragging the world down the road. But for Eleanor, normal life had thorns. On the corner by the barbershop, two young men, Wally and Nick, found humor in everything they didn't understand. "There goes the girl with the crooked leg," one whispered. "Yeah, she's pretty from the neck up," the other laughed, as if he were brilliant. Eleanor pretended not to hear. Who hasn't pretended not to hear just to make it to the end of the day? At the store, she delivered the carefully embroidered cloth, delicate thread, flower by flower. Mrs. Davis complimented it, but paid less than agreed. "Next month, all right, Eleanor?" "Yes, ma'am," she'd say, tucking the few bills away, like gathering crumbs of respect. In the afternoon, she sewed by the window with the sun streaming in. And I swear to you, anyone passing by who saw her face, fair skin, attentive eyes, would say that beauty lived there. But the town chose to see the leg, not the girl. And the worst thing about a wound is when it becomes the talk on everyone's lips. The Sunday after church, Eleanor waited for the steps to clear before crossing the square. One day, Father Thomas noticed, "My daughter, why do you wait for everyone to leave?" "Because when I walk, Father, I become news." God doesn't make mistakes in the mold, Eleanor. It's the world that messes up by using the wrong measuring stick for people. She managed a slight, sincere smile which lasted until the first snicker from the next corner. At home that night, the sound of rain on the roof was like an old clock. Mrs. Yvonne sat next to her daughter. "You are brave, girl." "Mom, bravery is moving forward even when no one believes in you." "One day someone will see you right," her mother promised. "And if that day never comes?" Eleanor asked, staring at the oil lamp. "Then we'll invent that day," her mother replied firmly, like someone charting her own bloodline's destiny. But the truth was, Eleanor carried another pain no one saw. It wasn't just the leg, it was the fear of being a burden on someone's life. The fear of loving and hearing, "It's too much for me." That's why she trained in secret. In the late afternoon, when the town was distracted, she would go down to the back fence of the yard and walk a short path, 10 steps, then 15, then 20. When she stumbled, she pressed her lips together so the tears wouldn't escape. No one needed to see her weak, not even herself. There was one time, and I remember it as if I'm seeing it now, when the sky opened up into a beautiful red, and Eleanor stopped in the middle of the yard, breathless, with her hand on the fence. "I will conquer this path, even if it's inch by inch," she told herself, like taking an oath before an altar. In that moment, I knew. The town could laugh, but she had made a pact with her own life. And remember this well, Eleanor also held a secret. Not one you whisper, but one that only reveals itself when fate decides to knock. It's the secret that will align all these difficult steps later on. When the moment comes, you will understand why the whole town had to look down. For now, stay with me, because it is in this silent pain that the story gains strength. It is here that the courage is born that will meet a simple man, one capable of seeing what no one else could. And when they cross paths, when they cross paths, the town will have to choose between shame and respect. Tell me in the comments what town you are watching this story from. I really want to know who is here with us. The Lonely Farmer. While Eleanor carried her pain in silence, across town there was a man also struggling with loneliness. His name was Avery. He was 30, his body sculpted by fieldwork, and his eyes held more weariness than joy. He had inherited his father's small farm, along with debts that forced him to work from sunup to sundown without rest. His house was simple, rough-hewn walls, a roof worn by time, and a porch where he sat at night to listen to the silence, since there was no one to talk to. The neighbors commented, "A man that size should be married by now," a woman would say by the well. "Yeah, but who's going to want to live with a guy who only knows the shovel and the cattle?" Another would complete, laughing. Avery pretended not to care, but deep down it hurt. He had little money, no luxuries, but he had a heart that still believed he could be loved. Yet no woman had truly looked at him, only at the size of his farm, and since his was small, he always went unnoticed. One afternoon, he was talking with his older friend, Old Man George, while fixing a broken fence. "Vree, you need company, son. This life alone will break any man." "And where will I find someone who will accept this hard life with me?" "George, women like new dresses, packed dance halls. I only have dry dirt and skinny cattle." What keeps a real woman isn't wealth, it's respect, the old man replied in a firm voice. That day, Avery returned home lost in thought. Deep down, he wanted to believe old man George was right, but every time he looked around, he only saw bare walls and a simple plate of food on the table. The loneliness seemed greater than the hope. Sitting on the porch that night, he looked up at the starry sky and murmured, Lord, if you hear me, give me a sign. I don't want riches. I don't want more land. I just want someone to see me for who I really am. And so amidst the hard life, fate began to draw the meeting of two souls marked by pain. He was a strong man, but poor and lonely. She was a beautiful young woman, but scorned by the town's cruelty. Both carried wounds that no one saw. Little did they know that their paths were about to cross, and when they did, nothing would ever be the same. The market standoff. It was Saturday morning when Eleanor decided to go to the market. The sun was already high, baking the red dirt of the road, and every one of her steps felt like a battle against her own body. She carried a small straw basket with eggs and embroideries she intended to sell. As she walked, she felt the curious stares of the people passing by, and it squeezed her heart like an invisible hand suffocating her. At the market entrance, a group of young men leaning near the barber shop started whispering. Wally, always mocking, spoke loud on purpose. Look who showed up to trip through the fair. The cripple. The laughter echoed, and Eleanor lowered her face, trying to pass quickly, as if she wanted to disappear into the dirt floor. It was at that instant that a man stepped up, his eyes flashing with indignation. It was Avery. He couldn't stand injustice, much less the cowardice of laughing at a defenseless girl. Ain't you ashamed? He asked in a low, grave voice. A real man doesn't laugh at another person's pain. The young men went silent for a moment, surprised, but soon retorted. Well, Avery, you gonna defend her now? Isn't it enough that you live alone? Now you're gonna start trouble with the whole town? If the trouble is shutting the mouth of a coward, then count me in, he answered, without lowering his gaze. Eleanor, embarrassed, clutched the basket to her chest. Avery approached and with a simple gesture offered help. Let me carry that for you, ma'am. Shyly, she answered softly. You don't have to. I can manage. I know you can, but it doesn't hurt to share the load, does it? And so they walked through the market together. While she sold her embroideries, he held the basket. And for the first time in a long time, Eleanor did not feel invisible or ridiculous. She felt supported. On the way back, out of sight of the town, she risked a shy smile and said, You shouldn't have gotten involved. Now they'll talk bad about you too. Avery looked at her steadily and replied, They've been talking bad about me ever since I was left alone on the farm. But if I had stayed silent, I wouldn't have forgiven myself. That was their first honest conversation, and though short, it carried immense power. It was the beginning of something the town could never have imagined. Two broken destinies recognizing each other in pain. In that instant, Eleanor understood that someone had finally looked at her, not as a defect, but as a person. And Avery, for the first time, realized his loneliness was not greater than his courage. If you are enjoying this story and want me to keep telling you everything that happened to Eleanor and Avery, don't forget to like this video and also hit that new subscribe button below. It helps us bring you more powerful stories like this. The simple language of trust. After that Saturday at the market, Avery began to appear along Eleanor's path in small, respectful moments. He wasn't invasive. He kept a respectful distance, offering his arm only when the road tilted and her leg needed a rest. And I want you to see this scene with me. Two people walking side by side without rush, like someone learning a new language, the language of trust. The next day, Avery stopped by her house with a bag of cornmeal on his shoulder, hat in hand. Mrs. Yvonne opened the door, suspicious. Yes? I'm Avery from the old lakeside farm. Just wanted to thank your daughter for the embroidery I saw at the market. It's mighty fine work. Brought some cornmeal for grits. It's good quality. Eleanor heard from the window and slowly came forward. Sir, you didn't have to. It's not a favor, Miss Eleanor. It's a trade. I have cornmeal to spare, and if you'd like, I'll buy a few embroidered cloths to decorate my mantelpiece. Mrs. Yvonne cleared her throat, still on guard. Do you have family, Mr. Avery? I had my father. Today I only have the land. But the land doesn't talk back at night. he said with a brief smile that hid a good deal of loneliness. Their friendship was born the right way, in the simple things. Eleanor began to visit the farm on afternoons with less sun. Avery would adjust a small stool on the porch so she could rest her leg whenever she wanted. He showed her the vegetable beds, the corral, the calves that let out high-pitched cries in the distance. "That one there is Rebel, stubborn as a mule," Avery joked, pointing to a brown horse that turned its head haughtily. "He's not stubborn, he's scared," Eleanor said, gently extending her hand to the animal. "We always beat at our fears first. Then we learn the rest." Avery fell silent, watching her gesture. There was tenderness there, and there was truth. The conversation started short. "You can call me Eleanor." "Eleanor, what do you like to do besides embroider?" "I like to listen to the radio at night and look at the sky. The sky promises me a tomorrow." "The radio keeps me company too," he confessed. "But the sky, I haven't really stopped to look at the sky." "Then we'll look at it together another day," she replied without looking directly, like someone asking destiny for permission. With time, the silences became comfortable. She would bring a white cloth, embroidering branches and flowers while sitting on the steps, while he fixed tools, sharpened the scythe, cleaned the harness. When the sun turned to gold behind the hill, Avery would put water on to boil and brew fresh coffee. "Want some?" "I do. Coffee shared tastes better," Eleanor would say, warming her hands on the mug. One day, the rain came down heavy, and Eleanor was stuck on the porch. Avery lit the oil lamp. The flame danced, casting patterns on the walls. "Can I ask you a question, Avery?" "You can." "Why did you get into that fight for me?" He paused before answering. "Because no one did that for my father when he got sick, and people started treating us like dead weight. It took me a while to understand, but now I know. Sometimes we need to be the arm that someone else is missing." Eleanor lowered her eyes. Her voice was soft but firm. "Thank you for being that arm." The friendship also grew in protection. Old Man George, who knew the town's malice, warned Avery, "They're gonna talk. Don't pay it no mind. A clean friendship is defended by time." "I'm not afraid of the gossip, George. I just don't want her to suffer more than she already has." "Then listen more than you talk. Someone who truly listens heals wounds they didn't even know they had," the old man advised. And Avery listened. He listened when Eleanor lightly shared how she secretly trained her steps in the yard every afternoon, trying to make her leg obey a little better. He listened when she admitted she was afraid of being a burden on anyone's life. "A burden is what you carry alone," he replied. "Between two people, it becomes an embrace." In town, of course, eyes kept watching. Wally and Nick grumbled at the barbershop door. Well, the farmer found himself a pastime. But every laugh seemed to lose strength when, at dusk, Eleanor was seen returning down the road with a scarf on her hair and a new piece on her face. Peace is something few people can name, but everyone can see. One clear afternoon, Avery brought a simple gift, a thick, smooth rope and 4 stakes. "What's this for?" Eleanor asked, curious. "So we can mark a straightway path here in the yard. You train whenever you want, with the rope guiding you. It's not a cane, it's a track." Eleanor touched the rope like a small miracle. "Thank you." "Thank you," Avery corrected, "for letting me stay close." And if you allow me to say so, it was then that their friendship grew to the exact size of hope. It wasn't romance yet. It was care. It was sharing. It was the certainty that the world could remain crooked, but that on that porch there was room for a piece of rightness. And without realizing it, every step Eleanor took on that makeshift track was a step that also straightened Avery's path inside. What they didn't know, and what I'll share with you now, is that this friendship would be tested. There would be days of sharp tongues, cruel stares, and difficult choices. There would be one night in particular that would change the course of the whole town. But for now, hold on to this image. 2 steaming coffee mugs, a horse that no longer startles so easily, and a rope on the ground pointing forward. That's how life likes to start its miracles. Without fanfare, without announcement, but with truth, the secret beneath the floorboard. It didn't take long for the town to start gossiping about Eleanor's closeness with Avery. At first it was whispers, phrases said in hushed tones on the church steps, but soon they became sharp words, launched without mercy. At the general store, while buying embroidery threads, Eleanor heard two women speak loudly enough to wound her. A girl in her condition should be content to stay at home. That's right, but she had to go for the poor farmer. Looks like the misfortunes teamed up. She held back her tears, paid for the thread, and walked out with her head held high, even though her chest was throbbing with pain inside. At home that night, Mrs. Yvonne noticed her daughter's distress. "Eleanor, what happened?" "Nothing, Mom, just words." "Words hurt more than stones, honey, and I fear this town is going to make you suffer still." Eleanor sighed and replied firmly, "I've suffered alone my whole life, Mom. If I have to suffer alongside someone who respects me, I'll accept it." But she wasn't the only one carrying the weight. Avery also began to feel the town's sideways glances. One day after church, Wally provoked him in front of other men. "Avery, a man of your stature could find a better woman. You gonna tie yourself down to a cripple?" Avery took a deep breath, clenched his fists, but stayed calm. "Better isn't the one that pleases others' eyes. Better is the one that brings peace when you come home." The men laughed, but one or two stayed silent, perhaps embarrassed. The truth is, Avery no longer cared about their talk. What hurt him was seeing Eleanor trying to hide, fearing that her presence was a source of shame for him. One afternoon on the farm porch, she said with a choked voice, "Avery, maybe it would be better if you didn't look for me anymore." "And why is that?" he asked, startled. "Because people laugh at me, and now they laugh at you, too." He moved closer, carefully touched her hand, and said, "Eleanor, if people laugh at me for being by your side, it means I chose right." She cried because she wasn't used to hearing a defense, only criticism. She cried because, for the first time, she felt that someone saw beyond the defect the town so readily pointed out. But the pressure was growing. Every day, a new comment, a crueler laugh, an invented story. It was as if everyone united to remind them that they didn't have the right to be happy. The prejudice came not only from the mocking young men, but also from the church ladies, the neighbors, even the closest ones. In that era, being different was almost a sentence, but Avery held firm, and Eleanor, though wounded, found a shelter in him. And it was in this pressure, this fire of judgment, that their friendship began to transform into something greater. Now tell me, if you were in Eleanor's place, would you have the courage to face the whole town for a feeling that was only just beginning? At night, when the town fell silent and only the distant croaking of frogs reminded them, there was life in the darkness. Eleanor pulled up the loose floorboard next to her bed. Underneath, a wooden box with worn corners held three things: a handful of coins wrapped in a blue kerchief, a yellowed letter signed by a doctor in Nashville, and a hardcover notebook where she wrote everything she didn't have the courage to say aloud. The letter, dated 2 years earlier, said there was a possibility of correcting her leg with surgery, followed by months of using a brace. Possibility, a beautiful, cruel word. The doctor explained the risks: pain, time, money. If it went wrong, the leg could worsen. Eleanor had read it so many times she knew passages by heart, but she never showed it to anyone. Not her mother, and certainly not Avery. She didn't want to be pitied. She couldn't bear to see in his eyes the mixture of fear and sacrifice she had already seen so many times in others. In the notebook, the lines were firm, without flourish. "Today I took 20 steps on the rope track. It hurts, but it doesn't bleed. Tomorrow I try 25. The world laughs at the one who limps in the square. I laugh back when the evening ends and I'm still standing." And in a corner of the last page, a secret that was almost a written scar. "The small creek bridge didn't break by itself. 2 boys chased me, yelling. A shove, water, a rock, a fracture. They grew up. Today they laugh in the barbershop." The truth, the one she hid from everyone, was that Eleanor's leg wasn't born that way. It became that way. She was 12 when she fell off a narrow footbridge on a summer afternoon, fleeing the cruelty that had already singled her out. Her family was poor, the bones set crookedly, the pain settled, and the town christened the girl Cripple as if it were a first and last name. The 2 boys turned into men with easy laughs, Wally and Nick. She never told, not out of weakness, but to spare her mother the shame, and perhaps to not start a fire that could spread through the entire town. One night, Mrs. Yvonne noticed her daughter's red eyes and risked asking, You're hiding something from me, Eleanor. I'm hiding what doesn't fit in your worry, Mom. If I tell you, you won't sleep. Then let me lose sleep, her mother replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. I don't want you to lose yours alone. Eleanor took a deep breath, but stopped at the edge of the abyss of words. She kissed Mrs. Yvonne's hand and only said, when the time is right, I'll tell you. At the farm, Avery noticed her quiet effort. When she stopped in the middle of the rope track, holding her breath as if stopping a flood, he would look away so as not to intrude on the pain. And when she started again, he would walk a few steps alongside her without saying a word, marking the rhythm with the weight of his own feet on the earth. Does it hurt? He risked asking one day. Pain is my language, Eleanor answered with a half smile. The important thing is that it's starting to understand me. If the language is too heavy, share it with me. I share the silence, she said. The rest I still need to learn to carry. One cold, windy afternoon, Eleanor went to see Rita the healer, a woman with gentle hands and knowing, ancient eyes. She sat, listened to the whisper of prayers and the snap of dried herbs. Daughter, Rita said, gently pressing Eleanor's shin, what knocked you down back then still lives in your head. The leg remembers. You need to decide what to do with that memory. And if I decide right, but it still goes wrong, we don't control the end, only the step. Take the step, God takes care of the rest. It was after this conversation that Eleanor folded the blue kerchief with the coins and made calculations that seemed to chip away at every day. Extra embroidery, cheaper threads, no sugar in her coffee when she could manage. She saved what she could. She's promised nothing to anyone, but she promised herself the attempt and wrote in her notebook, if I disappear for a few days, I didn't leave. I went after what they stole from me on the footbridge. She was afraid to tell Avery because she recognized a sweet danger in him, the danger of him trying to solve everything with his own hands. Avery was the type who would sell a head of cattle, a piece of land, his own peace, if necessary. And that hurt more than her leg. Eleanor wanted to get there by merit and courage, not by the donation of the only man who looked at her without pity. Hence the silence, hence the box beneath the floorboard. Some nights, however, she wavered, pulling out the doctor's letter, rereading the word possibility until it lost its shape, and in the dark she would confess to the ceiling, I'm scared, God, but I'm going, even if I come back worse. I'm going. What I won't do is come back without trying. Outside, the town kept pointing fingers. Inside, a plan was aligning point by point, like the stitches she sold at the market, and every stitch had Avery's face drawn behind it, even if she pretended otherwise, because without saying it, Eleanor already knew. Whatever happened to her from then on wouldn't be hers alone, it would be theirs. And it is in this tough, intimate secret stored under the floorboard and beneath her skin that fate sharpened the blade of the coming days. The town's big celebration was approaching. The fair banners already colored the square, and no one imagined that the dance hall would soon be the place where the past would return, where cruelty would meet its mirror, and where a simple gesture would change the course of two lives. The Midsummer Dance. The calendar marked July, and the entire town was preparing for the big midsummer dance at the church hall. It was the most anticipated event of the year. Colorful banners crossed the square from one end to the other. Large bonfires were built with tall logs, and the smell of barbecue and popcorn spread even before the sun set. For the young people, it was time to show off. The boys in pressed shirts, the girls in braids and full skirts. For Eleanor, it was the most feared night. She knew that if she went, she would become a target of stares and whispers, as always. But that afternoon, Avery showed up at her door. He held a carefully folded red kerchief in his hand. I came to ask you to the dance. Eleanor's eyes widened, nearly laughing nervously. The dance, Avery? You know how it'll be. They'll laugh. Let them laugh. I won't let you watch life from the outside. She took a deep breath, trying to look away. I don't know how to dance. No one knows until they try, he said, handing her the kerchief. Tonight, Eleanor, you choose whether the town laughs at you or laughs for real. When night fell, Eleanor entered the hall with firm steps, leaning on Avery's arm. The murmuring started immediately. Eyes turned, mouths whispered, but he walked straight, proud, like someone carrying the most valuable of companions. The fiddler started a lively reel and the couples began to dance. Skirts spun, boots stomped on the wooden floor. Chivalry, without hesitation, extended his hand to Eleanor. "May I have this dance?" he asked aloud for everyone to hear. A strange silence filled the hall. Eleanor felt her heart beat like a drum in her chest. She wanted to refuse, wanted to run, but something inside her said it was time to face them. She took his hand, and there, in front of everyone, Avery led her out. Her steps were slow, awkward, but every one of them was supported by him with firmness. Eleanor did limp, yes, but with every slight stumble, Avery's strong arm held her, lifting her with dignity. In the corner, Wally didn't miss his chance to yell. "Look at that, the farmer decided to dance with the gimp." The laughter echoed. A chill ran down Eleanor's spine and she tried to pull her hand from Avery's, but he squeezed tighter. "Look at me. Don't look at them," he said firmly, looking into her eyes. "I'm the one dancing with you, not them." She took a deep breath, let him guide her, and little by little the whispers died down in the face of the scene. Not because the town had learned to respect, but because there was something commanding in that gesture. A poor man, but a man of honor, stood up against the cowardice of everyone. When the music ended, Avery did not let go of her hand. He raised it for all to see and said in a firm voice, "Whoever laughs at her, laughs at me too, and I carry no shame at all." A heavy silence fell over the hall. No one dared to answer. Only their lowered eyes betrayed the shame that, for a moment, had changed hands. That night, Eleanor returned home with tears in her eyes, but they were not tears of pain. They were the tears of someone who, for the first time, had been lifted up in front of everyone, not knocked down. And you, who have been with me this far, have you subscribed to Windswept Tales so you don't miss the conclusion of this moving story? The Price of Dignity. The dance was well underway when the fiddler announced the barn dance wedding caller. The hall was buzzing with laughter and hasty steps. Avery and Eleanor stood off to the side, catching their breath after their dance. He wiped his brow with the red kerchief. She adjusted her simple dress, trying to hold back the emotion still trembling inside. For a moment, it seemed the night would end in peace, but malice, when it fails to shine, seeks to extinguish others. Wally and Nick disappeared out the back door and returned with a plan and cynical smiles in their eyes. Within minutes, they spread the word among a few young men about the trick they would pull during the next round of dancing. High up in the hall, nailed to a beam, someone quickly hung a wooden sign covered by a cloth. "Attention, folks," Wally shouted, feigning cheer. "We have a special coronation tonight." As the music started, couples lined up. Father Thomas, distracted with the organizing, didn't notice the trap. The dance moved forward, in and out, promenade, do-si-do. Avery, not wanting to draw too much attention, led Eleanor only along the edges, respecting her limits. That's when Wally pulled the cord and the cloth dropped. The sign appeared, crude letters painted in white, "Queen of the Limp." A dry laugh cut through the hall, followed by others, until the laughter turned into a swarm. Eleanor paled. Avery felt the blow like a punch to the chest. He took a step forward. "Take that down now," he said low, without trembling. "Calm down, Avery," mocked Nick, waving his hand like a master of ceremonies. "It's just to liven up the party." The fiddler tried to continue, but his fingers felt heavy. Some people stopped laughing, lacking the courage to face their own cowardice. Others, excited by the cruelty, clapped in a false rhythm. Mrs. Yvonne, on the other side of the hall, put her hand to her mouth. "My daughter," she whispered. Eleanor tried to hold her composure, but Wally approached with a cardboard crown decorated with small flags and raised it as if to crown her. "Don't touch her." Avery's voice echoed on the floor like the crash of thunder. He seized Wally's wrist, firm, without gratuitous violence, but with the strength of a man carrying his own dignity. "Let go, Avery," Wally hissed, wrenching himself free. "What are you going to do, fight the whole town?" In that moment, everything happened fast. Someone stretched out a foot in Eleanor's path. Off balance, she fell to her knees. The scrape on the floor drew a low whimper that hurt more from shame than from the skin. The crowd wavered between a gasp of surprise and nervous laughter. Avery immediately knelt. "Give me your hand, Eleanor, slowly," he said, lifting her with the delicacy of someone handling crystal. Her eyes, filled with tears, met his. "I want to go home." "We're going now." Avery helped her to her feet, embracing her shoulders. He took 2 steps and stopped in front of the sign. He climbed onto a chair, ripped the piece of wood down with a yank that made the nails screech, and threw it to the ground. "Her leg isn't the shameful thing," he said, looking at the entire room. "The small courage of those who need to humiliate others to exist. That is the shame." The silence that followed was not of respect. It was of shock. A pause in which everyone measured their own size. Father Thomas stepped forward, tense and bellowed, "Enough! This is a house of celebration, not cruelty." But the wound was already open. Eleanor, leaning on Avery, crossed the hall like someone crossing a desert. Outside, the cold night air hit her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I ruined your evening." "You didn't ruin anything," Avery replied firmly. "They're the ones who don't know what a celebration is." In the distance, the bonfires crackled as if the fire itself protested. In the square, some people lowered their heads as they saw them pass. Others turned away, unable to face their own shadow. Mrs. Yvonne ran to her daughter. "Let's go home," she said, hugging her in a gesture that was a prayer. That morning, the town slept heavier. The jokes that were still whispered in kitchens tasted like ashes. And in her simple bedroom, Eleanor sat on the bed, her knee throbbing, looked at the box hidden beneath the floorboard, and understood that the time for waiting was over. The shame they tried to sew onto her did not belong to her. Avery, on his porch, stared at the dark horizon. His fist still hurt from having held the mocker's wrist. But what hurt more was what he couldn't prevent. He knew that from then on, nothing would be discreet. Destiny had been shoved into the center of the hall. And when destiny is called by name, it answers. The explosion of humiliation that night did not end at the hall door. It spread in waves, and each wave would push Eleanor and Avery toward decisions that no one else could make for them. Sometimes the whole town needs to see the fall for the rising to be monumental. And that turning point had already begun. Even if no one but the two of them could perceive it, the revelation in the square. After that cruel night at the dance hall, Eleanor spent days without leaving the house. She sat by the window, embroidering in silence, while the neighborhood whispers echoed louder than ever. The shame they tried to impose still burned, but it wasn't hers. It was the town's. Even so, the weight was nearly unbearable. Free in turn retreated to his farm. Over the days, he tilled the soil with double the strength, as if his body could forget what his heart insisted on repeating. The sound of the shovel hitting the dirt was his way of silencing the voices that laughed at the woman he respected most. At night, sitting on his simple porch, he looked at the horizon. The starry sky no longer brought him comfort. The silence of the farm, which used to be routine, was now loneliness. Old Man George stopped by one afternoon, bringing some homemade preserves. He found Avery leaning against the fence, his gaze lost. "You're dwindling, son. You're letting their weight become your weight." "It's hard, George," Avery murmured. "I can handle them talking about me, but I can't handle what they did to her." "Then do what they didn't. Stand. Stand firm. The town passes, but those who deserve it stay in the memory." On a cold morning, Avery finally found his courage. He brought a bouquet of simple wildflowers, picked with his own hands. When he arrived, he found Eleanor sitting on the porch, her legs stretched out, her gaze distant. "Morning, Eleanor," he said, holding his hat to his chest. She looked up, surprised by the visit. "Morning, Avery." He hesitated, then handed her the flowers. "Didn't bring riches, just what I thought was pretty on the way." She held the bouquet carefully, and a faint smile escaped. Sometimes the simple things are the most valuable. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The town began to forget the scandal, the way it always forgets what is inconvenient, moving on to the next victim. But for Avery and Eleanor, nothing had passed. He continued with his work, quiet, and she, inside the house, counted steps and gathered courage. Then, on a high sky morning, the dusty bus stopped at the edge of the square, and a girl in a simple dress, a scarf on her hair, and a gaze that no longer bowed stepped down. It was Eleanor. Few people noticed at first, but Mrs. Yvonne ran up first, hugging her daughter as if retrieving half her own heart. "My girl, you're back." "I'm back, Mom. And I came back on my own terms," Eleanor replied, hugging her tight. There was something different. Her walk still had its own rhythm, but it was firmer. Underneath her dress, the subtlety of a custom-made support reminded her that her leg needed care, but it no longer commanded her courage. In her hand, She carried a thick envelope with a Nashville postmark. She showed it to no one. For now, she kept it close to her chest. That same day, Avery was in the pasture, adjusting Rebel's harness, when he heard steps in the yard. He looked up and for a second, didn't believe it. Eleanor. She smiled, her eyes teary. I had to come here first. He dropped what he was holding and came to her like someone who fears a dream will flee. He stopped a step away and didn't touch her. You took your time. I had to, she said, not looking away. I went to settle things that were mine. And did you manage? She nodded gently. I managed the hardest part, not being ashamed of what I feel. The rest I'll tell you when the time is right. They sat on the porch. Avery brewed at his coffee as he always did, and the smell filled the house with memories of before. For a few minutes, only the wind hitting the clothesline and the rustling of the big oak spoke for them. I thought you, he began, searching for the word. That I had given up, Eleanor finished softly. No, I just went to find myself. Across the fence, old man George appeared, leaning on his cane. Well, look who decided to light up this yard again, he joked with honest sincerity. God keep you, girl. Amen, old man George, Eleanor replied. I still have a path ahead, but I'm not walking alone anymore. The news spread through the town in whispers. Wally saw her from a distance and twisted his mouth. The Queen's back. Shut your mouth, Wally, Nick cut in a rare flash of discomfort. Leave her be. What's wrong? You going soft now? The other provoked. Nick looked away. Sometimes shame arrives late, but it arrives. That afternoon, Eleanor asked Avery to see the rope stretched out in the yard, the track he had made. I thought about this every day, she said, touching the rope with her fingertips. The track stayed here waiting for you, he replied, holding the opposite end. She lined up her body, breathed, and began. 1 step, 2, 3. She stopped, firmed her stance, and continued. 4, 5, 6. The silence that followed was not of suspense. It was of respect. Avery didn't count aloud, but his heart counted along, beat by beat. At the end, Eleanor smiled without showing her teeth, a smile of one who wins within. I won't run anymore. Me neither, Avery said. If we're going to take a beating from the world, let it be holding hands. That night at home, Mrs. Yvonne prepared a warm soup and gently approached the subject. That envelope, is it from the doctor? Eleanor placed her hand on the paper, breathing slowly. It is. It brings an answer, a path, and a decision. Mom, I need the town to hear me. Not in a whisper, out loud. Sunday in the square. After church. I want to speak. Are you sure? I am. I'm tired of being the subject. Now I want to be the voice. The following Sunday, the bells rang the same chime as always, but the square was not the same. Avery arrived early, hat on, shirt buttoned neatly, and stood off to the side like someone giving space and guarding the rear. Father Thomas passed them and nodded, aware that something was about to happen. Slowly, curious people gathered, some out of concern, most out of habit. Eleanor, with the envelope pressed to her chest, walked to the middle of the square. The dust rose in a fine cloud, and even the mice, lying in the shade, lifted their heads. She looked at Avery, who returned a minimal nod. Go. Then, with an open heart, the girl the town learned to diminish raised her voice for everyone to hear. What would come out of there? What would come out of there would carry the weight of a new beginning. And that's how her return stopped, being just a homecoming, and became a landmark. There was no more hiding place, no loose floorboard, no secret that fit in the silence. There was, however, the straight road of an announcement that would change destinies, an announcement the entire square would be forced to listen to. The church bell still echoed when Eleanor took her position in the center of the square. The dust mixed with the bright clarity of the morning sun, and the people's murmuring formed a wave of curiosity. Never had that girl, who always walked with her head down, stood before everyone. Some laughed, others whispered, but there were also those who watched in silence, their eyes fixed on her. Eleanor took a deep breath, clutching the envelope tightly, as if it were the last anchor of her courage. Avery, firm in the background, watched, ready to intervene if necessary. Mrs. Yvonne stood, her hands trembling in her lap, muttering prayers that mixed fear and hope. Suddenly, Eleanor raised her voice. "You've always talked about me. Since I was a girl, you've made my leg a laughing matter. I grew up hearing that I would never be worthy of love, of a family, of respect. But today, I decided to speak myself." A heavy silence fell. The people used to seeing her rush past, speechless, now faced something new. A woman lifted by her own strength. She raised the envelope. "Months ago, I traveled in secret. I went to Nashville to consult doctors. I wasn't born with this difficulty. It was inflicted upon me. Inflicted when two boys you all know pushed me off the footbridge over the creek. I was 12 years old. I fell, fractured my leg, and never walked the same again. Those boys grew up, and they're still laughing today." A murmur ran through the square. Faces instinctively turned toward where Wally and Nick were standing. They instantly paled. Eleanor continued, "I kept silent out of fear, out of shame, not wanting to see my mother suffer. But silence never protected me. Silence only protected those who hurt me." She breathed, her heart pounding, and held up the open letter. "Here is the report. The doctor told me there was a chance to correct my leg with surgery and treatment. I fought, I saved every coin with my embroidery. I did what I could. I don't know if I'll have the strength or the time for everything, but one thing I've already won. I am no longer afraid of you." At that moment, Avery took a step forward, as if his body were a wall to prevent anything from reaching Eleanor. She, however, raised her hand, asking him to stop, and continued, "The man you called a fool, a pauper, worthless, was the only one who offered me a hand. When everyone laughed at me, he asked me to dance. And now I say for everyone to hear, thanks to him, I found out I'm not less. Thanks to him, I know I deserve to be loved." The crowd was speechless. The easy laughter had disappeared. Some whispered shamefully. Others looked at the ground. Even the children who didn't understand the full gravity felt the weight of the scene. Eleanor took a deep breath and finished. "You can keep calling me the cripple, but I already know who I am. I am Eleanor, Mrs. Yvonne's daughter, a woman of courage. And starting today, whoever laughs at me will laugh alone." A deep silence took over the square. The wind blew lightly, as if clearing the heavy air. Avery, with contained tears in his eyes, walked to her, took her hand, and raised it. "I always knew it," he said in a firm voice, "and now everyone knows it too." The scene was etched in memory. The town that always mocked had to fall silent before the truth. And even without asking, Eleanor earned respect with the force of her revelation. Now, I want to know from you watching this moving story, do you love stories from this era? If so, write "I love stories from this era" in the comments so we can bring you many more just like it. The miracle of reparation. From Eleanor's revelation, the square was never the same. The customary sound of murmuring gave way to a silence that cut like a knife. The people who always guffawed, who always made her pain a spectacle, now didn't know where to look. Some stared at the ground, others pretended to adjust their clothes, and there were those who had turned crimson, overcome by shame. Wally and Nick, the two men Eleanor had pointed out, tried to play it off. "It's a lie," Wally shouted, his voice choked. "Made-up story." But the nervousness in his tone betrayed him more than any proof. Nick, for his part, couldn't sustain eye contact, crossing his arms and shrinking as if wishing to disappear from view. Father Thomas, who had been watching in silence, spoke up. "The square of a small town carries the honor or the shame of everyone. Today, Eleanor brought the truth, and the truth is never the shame of the bearer, but of the one who caused it." A low chorus of murmurs spread. Some women whispered, "Who would have thought? She kept that secret for so long, and we laughed so many times without knowing." Slowly the crowd began to disperse, but it wasn't like always. There was no laughter or jokes. There was weight. Every step was silent. Every savio was crossed by the memory of Eleanor's courage. Avery remained by her side the whole time. "You did it," he said, his voice firm and emotional. Eleanor held the envelope close to her chest and replied, "No, Avery, I only just started. They need to carry what's theirs now." That night, the entire town seemed quieter. Even the radios in the homes, which always played loud after dinner, were turned down. Eleanor's name was still on every mouth, but not in a tone of ridicule, in a tone of embarrassment. At home, Eleanor sat with her mother at the table. Mrs. Yvonne held her hand and said, "Daughter, today you did what I never would have had the courage to do. I didn't just do it for me, Mom. I did it for all the times you cried alone, thinking you couldn't protect me." Today they felt the weight of the truth. Avery, that same night, lit the oil lamp on his farm and stood in silence, looking at the flame. The loneliness that used to weigh on him felt different. Now it was a serene weight, because he knew he was no longer alone. The town's silence in that moment was more than the absence of sound. It was the mark of a turning point. It was the reminder that those who laugh at others' pain might one day have to bow their heads before the courage of someone who never gave up on living. And in Eleanor and Avery's hearts, that silence was not emptiness. It was a promise. A promise that from now on, nothing would be the same. The fire and the rope. The night fell heavy, with a cold wind coming from the fields and low clouds announcing rain. Avery was finishing securing Rebel in the stable when a flash of light startled him. High flames were licking the roof of the barn. The cracking of the planks sounded like a scream. He ran without thinking, throwing buckets, pulling off doors, trying to free the calves. A beam, weakened by the flames, groaned above his head. Across the road, Eleanor saw the sky turn red. She grabbed her scarf, seized the same rope that Avery had stretched out on the ground months earlier to be the track for her steps, and rushed out, firm, even with the wind pushing against her. When she arrived, the farm was a furnace. "Avery?" Her voice cut through the smoke. "Here," he replied from inside the barn, coughing. "Rebel's loose, but that beam is going to fall." The beam suddenly gave way, trapping Avery's leg. The ground shook, the fire roared. Eleanor didn't think. She looped the rope around the beam, passed the other end around Rebel's harness, and spoke to the horse as if telling him a secret. "Easy, boy. Slowly, for both of us. Pull." Rebel pulled, Eleanor pulled with him. The beam dragged an inch, 2 inches, until Avery managed to free his leg and crawl out. She embraced him by the waist, and stumbling, the two moved from the heat into the cold air of the pre-dawn. In the yard, Avery fell to a seated position. His right leg was bleeding beneath his torn trousers. He breathed short gasps between pain and relief. "You saved my life, Eleanor," he said, his voice seeming to break. "You taught me the way," she replied, showing him the scorched rope. "I just followed it." Neighbors arrived with buckets. Old Man George directed the water. Mrs. Yvonne cried silently, holding her daughter's hand. At the gate, 2 figures stopped. Wally and Nick, hidden in the shadows, exchanged glances. From the darkness, a voice spoke with a pain deeper than any flame. I started the fire," Wally confessed, swallowing hard. "It was just to scare him. It wasn't supposed to." Nick lowered his head, shame weighing on his neck. Father Thomas approached sternly. "What is lit by malice is only put out by justice. You will answer for this." Avery was taken into town. The doctor bandaged him, speaking little and clearly. Bad fracture, maybe permanent injury. In the waiting room, Avery held Eleanor's hand. "I won't be the strong man who defends you from the town anymore," he murmured, his eyes dampy. Eleanor squeezed back. "A burden is what you carry alone. Between two, it becomes an embrace. Remember?" The next day, the news spread faster than the wind. The crippled girl saved the farmer. The same rope that guided her steps had pulled the beam that trapped him. The town, which had only laughed before, appeared at the hospital door, not knowing how to ask for forgiveness. Mrs. Davis from the store placed an envelope on the table. Old Mr. Harlan left a wad of bills wrapped in newspaper. The women who had hurt her with their tongues brought coins, fabric, promises. Father Thomas spoke loudly for all to hear. "This is not charity, it is reparation." Eleanor opened her own envelope, the one postmarked Nashville, kept close to her chest since her return, and breathed. She had the money for her surgery. She did. But she looked at Avery's bandaged leg, looked at the whole ashamed town, and made the decision that would define her forever. She placed her envelope with the others. "Him first," she said serenely. "Then, if there's courage and a path left, I'll go." Avery shook his head desperately. "No, that's yours." What's mine is yours too, Avery. You lent me the track. I'll lend you the step. The town, which thought it knew love only from parties, learned that morning about love and renunciation. And as if waking from a bad dream, it stirred. They held a fundraiser, raffles, a turkey auction. They donated sacks of corn, days of labor. Old Man George wrote everything down in a ledger. When they tallied it up, there was money for Avery's treatment and miraculously for Eleanor's surgery too. Reparation, the father repeated, justice walking. The final dance months passed. Avery healed enough to walk with a slight limp. Eleanor had the surgery, wore the brace, cried in private more than once, but returned to training. And the rope on the ground, now clean, marked a straight line of the future again. In the afternoons, they walked side by side. He learned to accept his own scar. She learned to trust the leg that had once been taken from her. Sometimes they stopped, laughed at a stumble, and started again. The sun set the same for both of them. December came. The church hall was reopened, new wood, the smell of varnish, and fresh corn cooking on the fire. Where the cruel sign once hung, a simple banner now read, Respect. The band tuned the fiddle, the square filled with a beautiful silence, the kind that comes before tears. Father Thomas called the two to the center of the hall. Today, the town learns to dance differently. Avery turned to Eleanor, his arms strong, not because it no longer hurt, but because he chose to be strong even while hurting, and extended his hand. May I have this dance? Eleanor breathed, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Now and forever. The music began gently. They moved forward, he with his slight limp, she with the leg that finally obeyed. Step by step, the entire hall sighed. No one laughed. Some men secretly wiped their eyes. The women didn't hide their tears. Mrs. Yvonne wept openly, like someone releasing the salt she had held for years. And when the song swelled, what our hearts keep forever happened. Avery let go of his cane in a gesture of trust and relied only on the embrace. Eleanor held him tight, without fear. The hall applauded, not for a spectacle, but for a repair. The music ended, for he rested his forehead against hers and whispered, I thought I lost my strength. Your strength was right here, Eleanor replied, touching her own chest and then his. And no one can take it away now. On their way out, the evening wind smelled like a beginning. The worn track rope was hung on the wall of the rebuilt barn, a reminder of the day a woman made a joke by the town, decided to create her own step, and save the man who saw her as whole. They say that from time to time, that hall repeats the same music, and when it plays, people of all ages stop talking, take the hand of the one they love, and take a step, a little slower, a little more deliberate. It's the way they found to never forget. Respect is not asked for. It is learned. And love, when born of suffering and courage, doesn't just heal two people, it heals an entire town. The years passed, and Eleanor and Avery's lives took a course that seemed impossible back then. The couple who were once mocked became an example. Avery's farm, once silent, now echoed with laughter, firm steps, and the sound of Eleanor's sewing, mixed with the sound of rebels' hooves in the yard. The town, marked by the shame of their past, learned their lesson the hard way. The tongues that once hurt were now silent, and even those who laughed, like Wally and Nick, ended up alienated, carrying the weight of their own mistake. The church hall, which had once been the stage for the greatest humiliation, now held the memory of an embrace and a dance that no one ever forgot. Eleanor, with her courage, showed that the greatest strength is not in the legs, but in the heart that insists on moving forward, even when the world tries to stop it. Avery, with his firmness, proved that being a man is not about having wealth or a perfect appearance, but about standing by the one you love when everyone else turns their back. The last time they were seen dancing, already elderly, the whole crowd rose in applause. It wasn't out of pity, it was out of respect. Their story had crossed generations, transforming into a living memory that love can be born of pain and rise up as the strongest of miracles. And now I want to know your opinion. Does this story deserve to be remembered? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and let me know what you felt, because your voice is important to keep these moving memories alive. If you were moved by this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Windswept Tales so you don't miss the next ones, and share this video with someone you know who also needs to be moved today. And what's more, click right now on the next story appearing on your screen. I am sure you will be even more surprised. We'll see you there.